increase the consequence of getting caught. And I'm not saying don't ride there, don't ski there, but make sure it's an appropriate day if you are going to ride or ski there, right? Understand what's going to increase the consequence. And this is a picture looking into Wolverine Cirque in Little Cottonwood Canyon. And really, in terms of fundamental avalanche skills, recognizing terrain, it is essential because it's the one piece of the whole puzzle in the world of snow and avalanches that we can control. If you ever have a question about the snowpack, if you ever have a question about the weather, if you ever have really weird partner dynamics, you can always choose different terrain. And if I move out of terrain that's 30 degrees into terrain that's 25 degrees or 20 degrees, and it's not attached to anything steep up above it, then I don't have to worry about avalanches. I can get out of avalanche terrain and I can have a great day, right? So if you ever have questions or doubts or concerns with your group, choose simpler terrain. Choose lower angle terrain. It's the one piece of the puzzle that we can control, which is why I just stand up here and hammer it, right? It's really an essential skill. So pull out your iPhone, get the Measure app. If you have an Android, find a slope meter app. I don't know. There's Theodolite is actually a great slope measurement app. It's on both Androids and Apple. Or BCA slope meter. There's all sorts of resources. But have a way to measure slope angle and do it a lot. And if you ride or ski certain places a lot, we actually have a master map at our house of the terrain we like to travel in. And we've actually written in the slope angles of the starting zones of those places where the avalanches start for that terrain. It's really helpful early season when you're trying to remember how steep something is to actually have a resource at home. So as you're going out, record it somewhere. Record it in your phone, record it in your mapping app, record it on the map. It can be a really great resource. And then practice. Here, this is a great example of avalanche terrain, and the trees give me a clue. I have some flag trees. I also just have really little trees. None of these trees are growing up to be their big old selves, right? And the reason is avalanches just keep running through and knocking them down so they grow up again. So practice measuring slope angle, practice recognizing avalanche terrain, use your partners as a resource, use folks that have been in the region as a resource. Hey, has this ever slid? Have you ever seen this avalanche? Is this avalanche terrain? The more you can recognize this, the better. Because ultimately, what we all want is our day to not end up like this, right? So recognize avalanche terrain, understand if you have a recipe for an avalanche, and get some more education. And really, if I don't want my day to end up like this, I need a system. And that's something that we've been working on in the snow and avalanche industry for a while. There's all sorts of versions of systems, but build a system with whichever partners you're traveling with. And really what I'm going to tell you to do is be more like Van Halen. Resonates with some of the older crowd, right? Okay. So the reason I'm going to tell you to be more like Van Halen is Van Halen, when they were touring, they had this really complex set with pyrotechnics and moving parts, and they could get really hurt if it wasn't set up well. And so they had this whole checklist for how to set up their set. And buried in it, in the middle, they asked for a bowl of M&Ms with all the brown M&Ms removed to be in their dressing room. So when these guys walked in, getting ready to play a show, if they saw the bowl of M&Ms with all the brown M&Ms removed, they knew that this team had gone through the checklist and done everything, and the set was set up correctly. And if they just had a bowl of M&Ms with no brown ones taken out, they knew that there might be shortcuts, so they needed to check everything. But they had a system that they wanted executed the same way every time, and they had clues. So, this winter, with an interesting start to our snowpack, I'm going to ask everyone to be more like Van Halen. And what I mean by this is have a checklist. Whatever avalanche education provider you use will have a system. They have checklists. ARI has a checklist, AAI has a checklist. All of the providers have checklists The goal is that you have a systematic approach to traveling in the backcountry, and that you do the same thing every single time. Because most of us will actually do most of the stuff on the checklist most of the time. But if you don't have a checklist, you're not going to do all of the things all of the time. And I also don't know about y'all, but I sometimes find it really awkward to have conversations with new backcountry partners, right? Especially if they're really experienced or I don't know them. And having a system, having a checklist, this is what I hand my partners every morning and say, this is how I talk about the snow, and this is how I talk about my backcountry day, and I want to move through this the whole time. So it also eliminates weird partner dynamics. And I took a big ride years ago. I went 1,600 feet. And if we would have had this, I don't think I would have gotten an avalanche, because we skipped steps and had weird conversations. So we have a stack of these out on our table. You're welcome to grab them. It does take education to use them. But have some sort of system. It doesn't have to be ours. And really what this breaks down to is know where to get the information and what the information means. So if you're based in Idaho Falls, you're sort of in this funny donut hole where you overlap with all sorts of forecast centers. So know the region that is mirroring the snowpack that you're going to travel in and get the information there. If you don't know where to find avalanche forecast center information, go to avalanche.org. And that's the landing page for all the forecast centers in the US. And if you decide to go up north and go to Canada, go to avalanche.ca. And the forecast center is going to give you the avalanche hazard. They're going to also give you avalanche problems. They're going to tell you about recent avalanches. They're going to give you recent observations. But first thing, before you go out, spend some time understanding what you're going to walk into. And then take the time to talk about the terrain that you're not going to go into. And do it in your bedroom slippers while you're still sipping your coffee. Because if we make a few decisions before we go in the field, we have fewer decisions that we can do better with while we're in the field. So spend some time understanding the avalanche hazard, avalanche problems, and make a few decisions before you go. Make sure you're prepared. I throw up the beacon shovel probe in here. Also make sure that you have warm layers. Make sure that you know first aid. Make sure that you have a way to stay warm and dry in the winter. So be prepared. Make sure all your partners are prepared. We've had quite a few accidents in Southeast Idaho, and Ethan's going to talk about this, where folks have not had foundational avalanche equipment. This is essential equipment before you go out. And if you don't have this, then recognize avalanche terrain and do not go in avalanche terrain, go in the flats. Nowhere near avalanche terrain, right? You can go out in the meadows, but if you're going to enter anything of avalanche terrain, be prepared. This is another way to look at avalanche terrain. This is from Bruce Tremper's Avalanche Essentials. It's a great book in terms of foundational knowledge. Bruce on one side talks about increasing probability of avalanches, and he's got slope angle. And then on the other, he talks about increasing consequences of avalanches. I think about this, increasing terrain traps, right? Oh, I'm going to get flushed through the trees. I'm going to go off a cliff in dangerous consequences. Safe consequences, nice, smooth run out, wide open, right? Usually safe terrain is that terrain that's less than 32 degrees, that has no terrain traps at the bottom. Now, if I'm going up into that dangerous terrain, I'm not saying don't ever do it. I like going in that dangerous terrain as much as anyone, but you gotta pick your days, right? Make sure that the forecasters are saying, yeah, there's been no avalanche activity. The avalanche hazard is low, it's moderate. Folks have not been seeing bullseye clues. So choose the times when you're going to go into that terrain and just be able to recognize it. Build a solid team. This is a really old picture of my husband. It's terrible, and I always love to put it in here. But build a team that you can communicate with, right? If you can't tell your partners when you're not comfortable, when you don't like what you see, those are not the partners you should be traveling in avalanche terrain with. So have a system to communicate with them, and have people that you trust. And while you're out, you should have this communication loop before you're going into avalanche terrain. Hey, is this terrain appropriate? Hey, is it appropriate for us to be, is this safe zone appropriate? Are we seeing anything we didn't expect? Are we doing what we said we would when we left this morning? And then at the end of the day, ask good questions. Because even if you take 4 avalanche courses, you might have avalanche education for 2 weeks. That's not that much in terms of your backcountry career. And the way that we can all continue to learn is to sit down with our partners and ask, were we good or were we lucky today? And where were we surprised? Did we manage terrain? Did we manage our group well? And is there anything we should tell the forecast centers, right? Ask those questions every day, because that's the way we get to promote learning. Because if we made a bad decision, the slope doesn't always avalanche, right? Sometimes we get lucky. And the slope isn't going to tell you that, but our partners might be able to work that out. So continue to have good questions, good conversation at the end of the day. And that's the foundational system. And so whatever system you use, if you use the AAI checklist, if you use the AREA checklist, if you and your partners come up with a checklist that you're going to use every day, have some system to go through your backcountry travel day every time so you don't miss a step. That's my plug. So, that's my foundational avalanche knowledge. Have a system, recognize obvious clues, recognize avalanche terrain. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about the setup that we have for the start of our season this year. And then maybe I'll lead a snow dance or something, right? Yeah, the talk right now is that it is El Nino. And depending on which weather person you talk to, they'll say, yeah, that means really low snow every time we have El Nino. If you talk to other forecasters, they'll say, it's hit or miss. But in general, what our setup right now is that we have shallow snow, right? And shallow snow is weak snow. When you have a shallow snowpack, I don't know if you can channel going back into the schoolyard if you grew up around here. If you have a shallow snowpack and it sits around, the first day it's really good snowballs, and you can have a great snowball fight. And 3 days later, you can't even make a snowball, right? It just turns to sugar. So when we have shallow snowpack, basically we end up with a foundation of sand for whatever we're going to put the winter snowpack on. So we don't like years where it snows a little bit and then it doesn't snow for a while. And that is kind of what we've got. So our first significant snowfall in the Tetons, but I think this rings true across this area. It took a while. We got some snow October 25th or 26th. And then early November, we got a rain event all the way up to 10,000 feet. And in some places, this rain event left us with a surface that looks like this. Really shiny, really translucent. The problem with this is then we have this great slick sliding surface. This is the start of our recipe for an avalanche, right? This is our bed surface. Slick, whatever we put on it might not stick very well. So as I'm going out, I'm poking around looking for this rain crust. And then that sat around until Thanksgiving for us. And we got a Thanksgiving storm, which was fun because you could go out and see avalanches and trigger avalanches. But we put a load on that, and so that load, that hit of snow, basically gave us a slab. And the rain crust that had been sitting around, we ended up with a little weak layer on top of the rain crust. So we had a great recipe for an avalanche, and we saw quite a few avalanches. This is a graph from the Bridger Teton site. A lot of forecast centers have similar sites, or similar graphs. You don't have to know everything about this, but basically this is the snowfall graph. It's new snow. This SWE is snow water equivalent. How much water is in that snow? The snow depth and the settlement. And so you've got the, where's my key? You've got, there we go, over there. Light blue is my new snow. Dark blue is my snow water equivalent. When they're even, it's about 10% snow. When the blue bar, dark blue bar is higher, we got transported to the Cascades. It's heavy, wet snow. When the light blue bar is higher, we go have a lot of fun, right? Really light, low density snow. So, but what I want y'all to look at here, and what I think about, is if I'm looking for the recipe for an avalanche, this is the first place I can actually find it. I had a little bit of snow, and then it sat around and nothing happened. Well, when a little bit of snow sits around and nothing happens, it basically, my ability to form a snowball decreases, decreases, decreases. So I have a weak layer right here. I'm building a recipe for an avalanche. And then I put more snow on it. So here, I would expect to see quite a few avalanches. And then I have another dry spell, and then I put more snow on it. And I'll show you the corresponding avalanche activity here. But when you see long lulls in between storms, you often see more weak layers formed. And so you may see, when you look at the avalanche forecast, they might tell you you have a persistent avalanche problem. What that means is these weak layers that form here, that sugar snow, it's called facets. It's a weak layer that sticks around for a long time. It's persistent. And so you see avalanches on those layers for a longer period of time. Then, I should have pulled up last year's. Last year's was like blue, 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 blue. And often what we had was storm slab avalanches, just that new snow, or wind slab avalanches. And if I see wind slab problems, I think about where the wind is blowing and transporting that snow, big open slopes, and I might find terrain that isn't affected by the wind go into the trees. It's easier to find places where the avalanche problem isn't. I won't say that wind slab problems aren't more manageable, because that's what almost killed me, but it's easier to find places that that problem doesn't exist, rather than persistent slab problems. They tend to be often wider spread, and they stick around for a long time. So looking at this, we go back to, do I have a recipe for an avalanche? In this case, we do. December 1st, we got a big snowstorm. We got about 2 feet of snow, winds. It got warm at the end of the storm. All of these words, I'm like, oh, it got heavier on top of lighter snow. It blew. We're building a slab. My recipe is increasing. So that December 1st storm, she's in college now. This is my good friend Phoebe. I need to tell her that I have this in here. But this is our season snowpack, right? This is our weak foundation, and now we're putting a big load on it. This is not the recipe for Jenga success, right? It's gonna tip over. And that's what happened in early December. This avalanche, you can see the ski tracks coming down. This failed while they were still skiing, collapsed, and avalanched. There's a few fun pictures. Big shooting crack. The slope was probably not steep enough, so it didn't avalanche, but same message, right? Mother Nature screaming in your ear. Recipe for an avalanche, watch out. And this was the forecast for that December.